Well, hello there. So good that you've made it through to episode 7 of the English Coach podcast. In the last episode, we encountered something a little different, which was the lived experience, insight into some of the real everyday things that work, if you're interested, of course, in improving your English and enriching your life. If you haven't had a chance to listen yet, feel free to check it out. It's a 3-part interview, part 2 of which features directly after this one. I also introduce my very close friend and learned associate, the indomitable Sibylle von Spitzen, who was instrumental in the planning and organization of this episode and episode 11. She was also there for episode 12, and she'll be with us for many more, I'm sure. The present perfect is an elegant form that I would encourage any learner of English as a second language to explore. This series on the present perfect has 3 parts. By the end of this episode, you will have had a proper introduction or reintroduction to the concept. Sometimes with grammar, the proceedings can appear rather dry, simply said. This sometimes less than lively quality of grammar work is perhaps a necessary evil, sadly. Sometimes, however, it's really not that bad, especially once you get it. Now, before we continue with grammar, let's be clear on one thing. My goal as a trainer or a coach here is not to flash my faculties and show you how good I am with the complexity of a topic, but to offer you different ways, so to speak, of possibly finding a simplicity that works for you. In episode 12, we essentially look at the same thing in another way. We spice it up even a little more, I promise. You will notice that this entire series on the present perfect gets even more colorful with each episode. All in keeping, of course, with my promise here to add a splash of color and life to your learning experience.
Herzlich willkommen zum English Coach Podcast, präsentiert von trainingtree.de, die personalisierte Lösung im Bereich Erwachsenenbildung. Und jetzt dein Gastgeber. Er sagt zwar immer ich und dich, ansonsten ist sein Deutsch fantastisch. iAntonio Patterson.
Alright, so without further ado, our topic for today, the present perfect. Now, this format has its limits. I'll, remind you of that again. I can't go into it in so much depth today. So now my introduction in German, please bear with me. I am an English native speaker, not a German native speaker. Alright, here we go. Das Present Perfect bildet man mit have oder has plus Past Participle. Past Participle heißt the third form of the verb. The second point. Man verwendet das Present Perfect für Handlungen in der Vergangenheit, die ein Ergebnis in der Gegenwart haben. The third point. Das Present Perfect wird generell mit dem Perfekt in Deutsch übersetzt. The fourth point. Manchmal kommt bin im Spiel. B-E-E-N. Natürlich wird das Present Perfect manchmal auch in den kontinuierlichen und passiven Formen ausgedrückt. Alright, so that was my German introduction, so to speak. Now we switch over to English. In exploring grammatical concepts, the first thing that we should do is to look at the meaning. Now, as I would explain to my learners, the present perfect form is used to talk about something that started in or is relevant to the recent past. That's the first thing. The second thing, it talks about something that has a present or an observable result. Yeah, now you can see something now. The third thing, it ended recently or it continues. Now, what's the key word there? Recent or recently. Auf Deutsch vor kurzem, neulich oder kürzlich. Now moving on. The present perfect, I think, is a fresh and elegant form. I would encourage any learner of English to familiarize themselves with it. It is not necessarily about using it all the time, but I do encourage structured practice now. First, structured practice with exercises, and after that, useful activation, or in other words, integration with your active language repertoire will begin to happen when you have the ability to recognize and reflect on the meaning. Recognizing for yourself when the form is used instead of other forms, such as the present simple or the simple past. All right? Now, the best way I think to explain grammar is not really to dive into the rules so deeply first with form and so on. We will look at the form a little later, but I'm going to start with a story. I usually use stories to explain, to dive deeper into the meaning of grammar because, they're less boring or more engaging, as you might say. And people get a better, or my learners get a better understanding of it when I do it that way. Now I'm going to invite you to just imagine. Imagine that you're sitting in a classroom and you're waiting on your trainer. Now your trainer comes in, trainer is me of course, and I walk in and I am walking tall. Well, taller than I usually do, and you have a feeling that something has changed. Now you look down and you notice that there are new shoes. My shoes look newer. You have never seen them before. Maybe I always wear black and today I'm wearing brown. And you can tell from the look of the shoes that they are new. I'm looking happy. I'm feeling good. I'm standing taller. And you ask yourself immediately, has Ian bought new shoes? Right? That's what you ask yourself. You might decide, okay, you want to find out for yourself because I'm looking so happy, much more happy than usual. You come up to me and you say, or you ask, Ian, have you bought new shoes? Right. Now, in this case, you might look at, or with the example I just used, you might ask yourself, so what is the verb? The verb is bought. The form used is the third form, or as I said earlier, the past participle. I like just using the third form. The first form is buy, the second form is bought, and the third form is bought. It's the third form of this verb. Now, this is an irregular verb, whereas normal verbs, you form the second and the third forms just by adding ed. With irregular verbs, they are a little bit different. There are lists of irregular verbs and you just have to learn them. You could think of them as vital verbs or essential verbs that you just have to learn as a learner of English. There are not so many. This list will vary depending on the book you use. Now, as I said again, this is an irregular verb. Buy, bought, bought. You will also notice that the questions asked, Ian, have you bought new shoes? That is definitely the present perfect form, right? You will see that there was have. Ian, have you bought new shoes? The direct question. When you're asking yourself, you might say, has Ian bought new shoes? Or has he bought new shoes? Now, what that means is that the present perfect is formed with has or have. Right? Now, moving on with this story, let us do a little bit of concept questioning, as we put it. All right. Now, did I buy the shoes long ago? No, I didn't buy the shoes long ago. They are new. You can see that they're shiny. You can see that they're new. You can see that I look different. How do you know? There is present evidence. There's something that you can observe now that tells you that I bought these shoes in the recent past, or implies to you that I bought them in the recent past, right? When did I buy the shoes? That's the question. Recently. Now, is there some connection to the present, right? Is there some connection to the present that has to do with something that happened, some event that happened in the past? Yes, there is. I bought the shoes recently. The present evidence that you can actually observe now is the fact that they are new. Okay, so now that is what is the difference then between when we decide to use the present perfect or not. All right, now let me again mention that by the end of this episode, you will have a better understanding of the present perfect. There is more to the present perfect, definitely. But this format, it has its limits, and I'd be happy to go further with this at another time, based, of course, on the feedback I get from you. Okay, so in continuing with the present perfect, we have to also look at what are called contractions. Now, contractions are used to make the present perfect look a little bit more elegant. It is a shortening of words. Now, there are some schools of thought that say, or they will tell you, that you should avoid using contractions in formal settings. However, I would not tell you that. Now, what is a contraction? A contraction is when we use the word, for example, have, we make it shorter by writing or saying apostrophe VE. If we want to make the word has a little bit shorter, we use apostrophe S. Now, let me give you some examples. I might say, I have done it. And that is the same as saying, I've done it. Much shorter. And, for me, it's just more efficient. Another example, she has done it. You would contract that by saying, she's done it. Right? Of course, there are also the negative forms. I could say, I have not done it. And I could contract that by saying, I haven't done it. Right? Now, again, as I said, some people will tell you that contractions should only be used in an informal setting. That is not what I think. The only distinction that I have with when you would use a contraction as opposed to not is when you want to stress something. So again, from this negative example that we used, I could say, I have not done it. That is what I mean. Now, if I say I haven't done it, maybe you don't hear that so clearly. And I want to make sure that you hear it. So I would say very clearly to you, I have not done it instead of I haven't done it. Right? So, it's not really about formality, according to what I think. It is just about where you want to put the stress and the fact that you want to put emphasis on, right? So, feel free to use your contractions. If anybody tells you anything else, send them to me. Tell them that Ian said that you can use it, whether it be formal or informal. Now, this episode was self-sponsored, but I'd like to give a resounding shout out to everyone who was involved, everyone who helped with the production of this episode today. Not the least of which, the lovely Sibylle von Spitzen. She is a no-nonsense kind of lady and adds a splendiferous splash of something else. I look forward to her cultured contributions for season 1. All right, so now moving on a little bit, this is for my people who are interested in business English. Now, business English for me just means English for work. It doesn't mean English for bankers and financiers. It could be anybody who uses the English language in a work setting. And in this case, I will use an example which is more relevant to work. All right, now, the first example, and again, this is kind of like a story. I could start by saying, our levels of sales rose last year. The second thing I could say is, our levels of sales have risen. Right? Now, you might ask yourself, what is the difference? Yeah. Again, our levels of sales rose last year versus our levels of sales have risen. Yeah. Now, concept questioning is always good. This helps us to understand. Now, when I say our levels of sales rose last year, right, you might ask yourself, are the levels of sales still the same now? And the answer to that would be not necessarily. Maybe that's a totally different story. Maybe, it's a totally different fact now. Maybe the levels of sales have changed. They're different from what they were last year. Again, our levels of sales rose last year. That is just talking about last year. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with right now. Now, looking at the second one, imagine you're in a meeting or something, and you say to someone, our levels of sales have risen. Again, our levels of sales have risen. And you ask yourself the question, are the levels of sales the same now? Most likely, the answer to that question is yes. Now, let's revisit the rules. Why do they use the present perfect in this form? Or why do I use the present perfect in this form? Or in this case, our sales levels have risen. I want to communicate that this increase in sales, of course, it started sometime in the past. Yeah, sometime in the recent past. And in terms of present evidence, we can observe now, from looking at the figures now, that they're still at the same level. So we chose to use the present perfect form. Okay, so now that we've finished with this introduction to the present perfect, or refresher, as you might put it, I would invite you to definitely check out the next episode where we'll be looking or digging a little deeper. In that episode, we will be looking more at comparisons between when we use the present perfect form versus the simple past form.
With a small win is always a good way to begin. Okay then, we've come to the end of this episode 7 of the English Coach podcast. Feel free to check out the show notes for this episode at www.trainingtree.de/podcast. Like it if you like it, and if you don't, lie to me. Just kidding. But feel free to share it with a friend, post a rating, or better yet, write a comment. This will help it to help you as it is intended to do. Subscribe only if you feel like, so you know when there's a new episode available. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to hearing from you, and bye for now.